mind-to-mind communication, and all communication is telepathic between the aliens and us, and that is experienced as deeply felt in the whole organism, not just cognitively. Every cell in the body of the person feels this information, and the information is by and large about the effects of human destructiveness. Nuclear war, but particularly the ecological crisis that Colin was talking about. That they are shown images which they feel in their bodies, and they weep as they talk about this, of the earth destroyed, of pollution, of the earth, apocalyptic images of the, and I'll say more about that at the end, of the earth coming apart, and they experience this as prophetic, okay? And one of the debates is this a literal prediction of the future, or are these warnings of what might happen if we don't change our ways? As the choice is up to us, I think, how we interpret those apocalyptic images. And now, the impact of the abductions on abductees, again, is twofold. There is, as we heard last night, the traumatic aspect, which is extremely powerful, extremely important, and very disturbing. It has four parts to it. There's the experiences themselves, to be rendered helpless, taken aboard ship, to have all these things done to one is against one's will. They don't ask, as Linda said, very upsetting. The second part of the trauma is the isolation. Abductees cannot generally talk. They tell their parents, even if the parents are abductees, they don't want to hear about it, and the parent is likely to say, oh, you had your nightmare again, your bad dream. No, no, Mom, it wasn't a bad dream. This really happened. They were really there. There were really these little beings in my... Oh, you know, there you go. There's your imagination again. You know, so the abductees learn to go underground. And similarly, when they're adults, they can't just go into the office place and say, guess what happened to me last night? I was taken up by alien beings up on, oh, there she goes again, you know. So they're isolated until they get into a support group or find a community like this where they can communicate about what's going on. Then that's the second part. The third part of the trauma, and this is, I think, the most fascinating part because it relates really to the central theme of my talk, is what I call ontological shock. This cannot be. This is not the way we were raised. 300 years of acculturation told us that the world does not contain intelligences that behave like this, and if there is spirit, if there is God, he certainly isn't going to permit little guys with big black eyes to come from, you know, God knows where, and to come and take our women and children. That's not the way God would behave. So this can't be. It just doesn't fit the reality that we have been taught to believe. And so it's just as shocking as Linda reflected is to them as to us, and that's what, you know, whether our heads explode or not, it is surely shocking to us. The fourth part of the trauma is that it isn't over when it's over. Most trauma, the rape that happened when you were a teenager or whatever, horrible as it may be, or being in the Vietnam War, or seeing your close friends killed, or feeling some complicity, you can work it through. This you can't work through. This is not something to get over. It's never over. It's always part of the experience of the person. And often abductees will come to see me when their children, they think, are involved, and they feel they can't protect the children, and that becomes the point where they arrive. Now, that's the trauma. The other part of it is what I call the transformational aspect of this. And this is highly controversial, okay? This is where Bud and I have had some very interesting conversations. Is the transformation, in other words, the growth, the spiritual opening, the sense of one's deep connection with the earth, with the opening of heart that many abductees undergo, a different sense of our relationship to nature, is that simply the human quality of what happens when we grow as a result of anything that's disturbing in our lives, or is it a built-in fundamental aspect of the phenomenon itself, not simply a byproduct? Now, I'm going to stick myself way out on a limb here, and I'm going to say, I believe it is not a byproduct. I believe it is a central aspect of the intelligence that is at work here. I believe it is fundamentally As fundamental as the hybrid program itself, this is fundamentally concerned with opening our consciousness and expanding our sense of ourselves to a different relationship to one another and other species and to life and nature itself. We can argue about that later on. Theory. What would a theory, I'm not going to give a theory, but I'm going to say what a theory would have to cover, because it is extraordinary that I can give a lecture on this subject, paint the whole phenomenon, all its sides, and somebody will say, you know, a psychiatrist, because usually a lot of psychiatrists where I talk up in Boston, someone will say, yeah, but that sounds like a birth trauma, or that sounds like anorexia nervosa, or, you know, that sounds like a displacement from sexual abuse. Now, a theory, however, has to cover 5 major dimensions of the phenomena. The consistency of the reports among people from all over who don't know each other, down to minute detail. Right? 2, the physical accompanying phenomena. That people, it's out of the house. It's not just out of the body, as Bud says. That people are not there. And there are many cases where there are witnesses who say the person is missing. This is not simply a psychological matter. 3rd, children as young as 2 years old report this phenomenon with great feeling and with nosebleeds and marks, and they'll point in the sky with fear and say, Mom, Mother, go up and ship, little man, bite my nose, take me up, play with me, you know, 2 years old. Personality theory is going to have to really stretch to include those 2-year-olds, you know, and I have several of them in my practice. The absence of a psychiatric condition. These are healthy people by and large who have been traumatized. These are not people who have a psychiatric disorder. There is not a single case where one of these accounts was explained on the basis of a psychiatric disorder. That's only 4. What is the 5th? Interesting to forget this. The association with UFOs, okay? I have many cases where somebody is being drawn by a power on the highway. They're moving along, and cases where they don't even see the UFO. They're missing time. When I do hypnosis, find they were led off into a field and they had a whole abduction experience. The next morning, after the experience, there'll be reports in the paper that a UFO was sighted in the community going along just where they were, right? Independent of their experience. So, all those 5 have to be accounted for by any theory. Now, there's no theory, I'm sorry to tell you, that can account for that so far, except exactly what the abductees say is happening to them. But, of course, the only problem with that is it absolutely shatters our worldview. All right, now I'm going to quickly go through, I'd like to leave some time for discussion. How much time do I, where's John? Half an hour? Okay. Some of the implications of this, and I'll just touch on them. Clinical implications. I cannot tell you how abused, this is professional abuse, okay, not child abuse, sexual abuse, how abused many of the people I see have been by mental health professionals who have tried to fit their cases into some familiar category. You know, we mental health professionals are very much like the generals that are accused of always fighting the last battle. Well, we always try to fit people into the last popular diagnostic category. In this case, it's sexual abuse. Now, abductees may be sexually abused by the aliens. In fact, I've worked with people where they have tremendous sexual problems, but they're related to the rape-like quality of the abduction experiences. And abductees who have been sexually abused, many of them have, because it's very common in this culture, are very able to distinguish the alien abuse from the human sexual abuse. Memory. Teaches something about memory. I have cases where somebody hasn't remembered anything for 25 or 30 years of their abduction, and suddenly something will trigger it. They're walking along a shore, a rocky shore in Maine, one case, where abduction occurred when the man was a teenager, and suddenly the whole thing comes back.
Another young man was
9 years old, was going along with his family up in the Cascade Mountains, and the UFO came down and was missing fun, and his whole life was changed by this experience. And yet, it was never mentioned in the family, and that's very common. How does this switching off work? We could learn something about our minds, I think, from these experiences, not just about abductions. Clinically, very interesting. Also, by the way, this completely, there's so many ways in which this phenomenon makes a mockery of many of the kind of conceits of Western empiricals. Take one, a favorite one in my field, epidemiology, okay? How many cases of XXX are there that da-da-da-da-da, okay? Now, in this situation, it depends when you ask. If you ask several of my people before a certain date, they would say, no, I had none of those experiences abduction related. If you ask them after the memory is triggered, they would say, yes, I have been abducted. In fact, there were these beings and the light and this came and this happened. Now, what does that do to epidemiology when it's not linear anymore, right? Well, yes, it depends when you ask. I mean, it doesn't work with epidemiology. Now, another thing about clinically that I think is very interesting here is emotion. What we're learning about emotion and reality. Because the way we learn about this phenomenon is through emotion. That is, people that work with abductees, and it is extremely strenuous. I mean, I don't think that, well, we could spend a lot of time, but the power of the experiences, I mean, the body shaking and the intensity of feeling. And I had one case of a woman, a very controlled, nice social worker in Boston who I had her psychiatrist come to the regressions, and I mean, this woman was sweating and writhing and shaking and screaming during this experience, and he, who had been a skeptic, he said, I know, Cheryl. I mean, that's her. I mean, yet I've never seen her behave like this, but she is not capable of behaving like this unless it's something authentic. So he's been working with me. I now send him cases. There's nothing like getting out of the well, like the frog, getting out of the well and looking, They don't want to hear. They got theories, my colleagues, but they don't want to look. Anyway, emotion, the power of emotion. When we can really confront and experience our feelings and our emotions, that's when the experience transforms. In other words, and this is what happens is, I often find that the traumatic aspect of it, that is the victim experience against the intrusive aliens, that will change if I can stay with the person through the depth of the terror and the feeling, the emotion. A point is reached where there's an acknowledgement, a surrender, a moving to another level of consciousness, and from that point on, when I do subsequent regressions, what is selected is not necessarily, maybe other abduction experiences, but they may be experiences that are more transcendent, more information-giving, more about a change of consciousness, not just a repeat of the old traumatic experiences. And subsequent abductions will not have the assaultive traumatic act. There is a way that is, and this is not blaming the victim or saying we choose in the sense that Bud was appropriately critical of. This is that there can be a shift in the nature of the phenomenon as the consciousness of the experiencer evolves. And that again depends on a very complex relationship, a kind of co-creative activity that occurs between the experiencer and the investigator. I won't go into details about what, because you're familiar with this, but the implications of this for physics are just enormous. For medicine are great. I mean, how does this healing occur? For example, many people are healed of all kinds of lesions quickly. John Altshuler has described the healing of the pathologist of cuts, lesions. I had one man who came after an abduction, a 3 or 4 inch gash down to the bone after an abduction experience. And he wanted to go to the doctor. Before he go to the doctor, the thing healed overnight. How does that work? Medicine could learn a lot from that. Paradoxically, they also are sequelae of physical distresses, gynecological problems, OBGYN problems, sinusitis. So at the same time they're healing, they're also creating problems for us, for sure. Philosophical implications. I've touched on those already. This opens us to vast new realms of reality. Abductees will commonly say, when I ask them, well, where is this happening? What's going on? They say, it is not, I can't, this is people who are not necessarily philosophically sophisticated, people who, so it has a kind of quality of genuineness about it. They'll say, well, it's hard to explain to you, but this is not happening in our space-time universe. This is happening, I can't explain, but it's not in space and time as we know it. So this is opening, they say it's beyond the veil, it's another dimension. I could spend a lot of time on that, but I don't want to leave time for discussion. It's one of these major areas of implications. Spiritual implications. And by that I don't mean they suddenly become believers in God in a kind of old-fashioned way, but what does happen in this transformational dimension of this is that the experiencers will connect with something they call the source of being, or home. That's a common word. And they will break into tears at a point in the experience where they see this luminosity, this connection with an energy source, with a God source from which they were cut off at some time in this or in a past life, and they experience us and the aliens as both deriving from that source. There's also a profound re-sacralization of nature. Nature becomes sacred. The connection with animal spirits, you heard about that last night, that becomes profoundly meaningful. The sense of oneness and connection with all of creation is a spiritually expanding quality that evolves here and is, I think, a fundamental aspect of the phenomenon. Implications for human identity are vast. Who are we really? Are we this earthbound masters of the earth and the universe, one among millions of species but preeminent, and here to exploit this piece of land and its resources, a kind of a giant marketplace for the greed of the human species? Is that who we are? Ethno-nationalists? Bosnians, Christians, Jews, Irish? Or are we, as one of the abductees at the Seattle conference said, are we children of the cosmos? Are we connected to one another, to all beings, to all ethnic groups, to all peoples? Are we connected in the cosmos? Now, following from that are obvious political implications. Now, there are two ways that I think this has profound political and economic implications. One is what I call the politics of ontology, and this is where this backlash that Colin was talking about is going to come from. That has to do with the fact that there is a political investment in the old worldview. A lot of major scientific, professional, governmental, institutional, corporate investment in the old worldview. It's very they're huge. Their careers. I mean, this is, my God. You realize how many people are going to have to go back and be sort of like, they talk about recalling the Pinto. I mean, they have to recall the whole scientific establishment here as a result of the. I mean, so there are huge vested interests, but it's not just material vested interests. There are emotional, intellectual. They're emotional. Our worldview, I mean, we fight wars over ideologies, points of view, differences, different ways of seeing and doing things. It gives us our sense of security. It's again, the frog in the well. If we have to change our worldview too quickly, too rapidly, we're afraid we're going to explode. We can't bear the anxiety of the expansion of consciousness that this implies. So that, I think, is where the heart of the resistance is the metaphor of the head exploding. Can't stand it. Well, the religious, formal religions don't like this either, because it's one thing to, religions make the decision that to let people discover for themselves their spiritual roots and connections, these powerful forces out there, is dangerous. So there's always, every society always has somebody deciding that there's a right way to think and a right way to believe and a right way to worship, and the mystical qualities that Bud was talking about that he finds in his art, and I kind of find in the crop circles and in his work, those qualities have always been dangerous. I mean, if you want to just credit somebody, call them a mystic in my neck of the woods. But what that means is that we're discovering our connection and our oneness with the cosmos for ourselves. So this is very threatening to organized religion. Now, finally, what is all this about? And John's going to talk about this, and I guess I've really covered most of what I wanted to say about that, but just to summarize, it's got these two pieces to it, this hybrid program, this creating another species, presumably for the post-ecological holocaust that we're preparing, but it could also be a warning. It also could be a metaphor. Again, metaphor we think of as a purely psychological matter, but in this situation, metaphor can be reified. In other words, metaphor can become concrete and real, which is something that interests me a lot. I can give a lot of examples where metaphors like tubes, meaning which represent birth canals that are physically experienced, for example, are also symbolic, where creation of another species here could be real and physical at the same time, telling us we'll have to find another way of evolving to another level, another species. The other thing it's about is, again, another intelligence reaching us to try to warn us about, and this is where the apocalypse comes. I think it is a warning. I think it is getting us deeply, so we feel it deeply, totally, so we do something, so we change our ways. We, as Rilke said, we have lost the senses. Those senses have atrophied by which we can know the spirit world. The spirit world has no choice if it is to reach us, but to reach us in the only language that remains to us, which is the language of the physical world. It must come to us to reach us, and I think this is where the crop circles come in, and it must teach us of the intelligence from outside, because we no longer can reach out to God or to the anima mundi, or the higher consciousness. I don't even know the language of it. I've touched on why the resistance to this shift in paradigm is so momentous. I think it has to do with how deeply attached we become to worldviews, even if they're catastrophic in their implications, as our materialist worldview has become. There's a philosopher friend of mine, Richard Tarnas, who wrote a wonderful book called The Passion of the Western Mind, and Tarnas summarizes this way the arrogance of the Western governing assumption, as he puts it. He says it is that any meaning the human mind perceives in the universe does not exist intrinsically in the universe, but is projected onto it by the human mind. This, he says, this complete voiding of the cosmos, this absolute privileging of the human, is perhaps the ultimate anthropocentric projection, the most subtle yet prodigious form of human self-aggrandizement, and represents an intellectual hubris of cosmic proportions. Tarnas again. There is, I think, a rich body of evidence to support the idea that the cosmos, far from being devoid of meaning and intelligence, is, and now Tarnas's words, informed by some kind of universal intelligence, an intelligence of scarcely conceivable power, complexity, and aesthetic subtlety, yet one to which the human intelligence is akin and in which it can participate. So I see the phenomenon that way. I see it as an invitation for us to participate in this cosmic intelligence. Now, the fact that it is so traumatic and cruel and rude does not dissuade me from that point of view. I think you do not expand consciousness, you do not learn except with terror. I'm not sure that's always true, but it is an intrinsic part of the expansion of consciousness, you don't crack open such a tough nut as the Western mind without distress. Zen teachers, as you know, may whack their recalcitrant students over the head with a mallet to get them to pay attention and to open up their thinking. This is like Zen learning, or something like that. So, finally, to me, abductees are heroes and heroines. They are on a heroic journey, and they come back from that journey, like Joseph Campbell said, from the hero's journey, and they teach us about the world beyond the world we have known. Why don't the spacecraft land on the White House lawn if they're trying to teach us? That's the reigning cliche, I think, of the resistance movement here. And that you hear that even among we even ask ourselves that. I think it's not just that the leaders would panic and panic the rest of us, or they try to shoot them down or whatever, or kill the aliens. I think it's deeper. I think they don't do that because that's not the way this works. This is not about hitting the leaders over their heads so they all teach us now, like good children, now look, the aliens are here, and the government says releases their files, and that's that. This is about our total minds, our total culture, opening ourselves, reaching out, expanding. It's subtle. It's subtle. It's allowing us to grow, to expand, to open to the phenomenon. It doesn't work in such a crude way. Now, I can't prove that. Again, that's not in the domain of proof. It's the sense I get from the work. Finally, I believe that these apocalyptic images, which are so prevalent now among abductees of the destruction of the earth, is an invitation. It is saying, this is the future, but you have a choice. We have a choice. It is inviting us to choose something different. It will not force us to choose anything different. It is inviting us to know ourselves. The alien abduction phenomenon, I believe, is a vehicle in the cosmos for a possible cosmic correction, that the Earth exists as an absolute jewel, perhaps the highest achievement of the divine consciousness that we know of anywhere, anyway, and that it is not a neutral matter that we are on our own destroying it. And that this is an intervention, awkward in some ways, magnificent in others, inviting us to another level of being. It is asking us, as Colin said, to know who we really are in the cosmos, to become creatures of the cosmos, respecting the divinity of the earth and one another, and opening to possibilities, both terrifying and really quite wonderful potentially. And I mean no disrespect to any abductees that have had horrible, traumatic, terrible experiences. That is part of this process, gruesome as it is. But I think we can understand the trauma in a larger context without in any way, what would I say, saying that abductees have not reached some higher level of consciousness and that's why they're having it. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that the traumatic and the transcendent are deeply interwoven here and part of a larger process which I think we're beginning to get glimpses of as we talk to each other in situations like this, beginning to get some glimpses of what this may be all about. Thank you very much.
We have 10 minutes for questions. I'll ask John to repeat the question and then respond.
Do you know who to pick? I don't know.
I've heard here and from most abductees that whenever there's any question about why this is happening, the answer is always that they're doing it to preserve their own species and not for our good. And it kind of reminds me of saying that Hitler added to human knowledge by the experiments he did in the concentration camps. I don't think the motive is for our
Well, again, this is a linear, the question is not for our good. I mean, that we, maybe the aliens are really doing this for their own species and not for our good. Again, I think this is an either-or, dichotomizing and too linear a way of looking at it. No disrespect, but I think that the way I would look at it is that both species are in trouble, okay? That the aliens, you know, there's an expression that the angels weep to have a body. That the aliens are not embodied. They are, as Bud said, they are fascinated with our sensuality, our loving qualities, our maternal qualities, our sexuality, and yet, and that they perhaps had that. I have some data about that. That they've lost that. They've become separated from the. They've become disembodied in a sense. We have lost our connection with the divine source. We have become totally materialized, and that in some way. It may be that, and I have evidence that some of them come from some kind of place where science destroyed their planet and that they are in some way impoverished in their own situation, but that I see it as a more kind of joining of two species that are in some way in some mutual struggle but also mutual connecting and for some purpose that serves both. God, I don't know who to call on. This is so difficult. Yeah.
I just want to say that another aspect of what she's saying could be for everything in the universe, for every negative, there's a positive. And while she's giving the negativity of it, where they're increasing their own beings or they're compiling a better form of being, the positive aspect on Earth is that there is an upgrading of awareness and consciousness.
The statement was that for every negativity there may be something positive, and that there's an upgrading of consciousness. Yes, I mean, I think that the paradigm shift, one of the fundamental aspects of the paradigm shift is what I would call the integrating of polarities. In other words, our minds tend to see things that are good for us, as bad for us, are they good guys, bad guys, a kind of adversarial structuring of reality. And I think that and many religions do that. There's the devil and God, and there's the evil and the good. It's not that those are not real. It's just that the task, it seems to me, or that I'm a Serb and you're a Bosnian or whatever, or Muslim or Christian, whatever, that the task of this time is the integration of polarities, of including the dark side of ourselves, or the dark side with the transcendent. Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. Two questions, he's saying. One is, can you regress yourself by using tape recorder and ask questions on a tape recorder? Don't do it. No, I could just stop there. No, because you need, these are very powerful emotions and feelings, and you need somebody there to be with you and hold you emotionally, if not physically. And I would not do self-regressions around abduction experiences. The second question is Sheldrake. Rupert Sheldrake, he's referring to as a British biologist who has a theory of morphic resonance. Is this morphic resonance? I've been interested in Sheldrake in connection with the past lives and the transpersonal aspect of this. I don't necessarily look upon the past life experiences literally, that so-and-so was an Egyptian painter, as one of my cases in the Middle Kingdom, but rather that consciousness, as we open it, has the capacity to tune in to collective memory all over the cosmos, all through time, once we open ourselves beyond a purely materialist way of restricted. Somebody bring it back. Yeah.
Do you find any correlation between abductees' return and that attitude about living as there is in near-death experiences? Do you think that possibly these events are part of a whole?
The question is the change in attitude toward life of abductees similar to the near-death experience? Absolutely. I think they're very closely regarded. Ken Ring might want to comment on that. Ken, you want to say something? Ken, we have the world's expert on connecting the two phenomena here. So Ken has worked profoundly in this area. Would you say something, Ken?
Well, I was very struck in hearing you talk today about the commonalities between our points of view with regard to the effects, the transformative effects of abduction and the near-death experience, and sort of in resonance with the question asked. My findings are very much along the lines of yours, that these effects of the NDE are precisely the same. The apocalyptic is precisely the same. The implication is precisely the same as what you're finding for abductees. And in my book, The Native Project, I try to bring together these two themes and sort of related. One other point in relation to the comments you were making, I'd like to mention the work of my friend Michael Joseph, which took us through today. His ideas about mind at large correspond virtually identically to your notions of a sort of a planetary intelligence or orchestra. So I see a tremendous sense of convergence among lots of different streams focusing on different experiences, all pointing at the same time.
I'd like to do something right now which is a little unorthodox, which is to call on, would you willing to be called on, Sue, for a couple of minutes? We have, I warned you, said you would, an experiencer who I think has a perspective which might be useful in this context.
Okay. Basically, I have been Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Sue. I'm an experiencer, and I've been through many of the experiences that many of you all have been through. Excuse me. The trauma, the fear, the anger, and everything. And what I learned was, if I stuck with it long enough to try to find the answers, excuse me, and balance myself, I came to a point where I found that the experience was maybe something other than what I had originally thought. I lost my fear, and the key point is when I lost my fear, the nature of the entire experience and subsequent events changed, and it became positive. So I think the important factor here is that the nature of my subsequent events changed completely when my mindset changed. And I did have events after that, and they were educational in nature. So.
Thank you. Whatever. Stay up here. Maybe they have a question for you. I don't know. Is Michael Grosso here? Is that right? Michael, do you want to... Yeah, I keep seeing you across the room. Did you want to say something about...
All right, I'll try. I was struck by you stressing the fact that these experiences are open to our interpretation, and that we have to cooperate with the process. It's not just something happening to us. We make the meaning. We are participating in creating meaning of these experiences. And even if they are kind of rough and difficult and traumatic, the option is always there. And I was very impressed by that finding that that's what seems to be happening.
Well, I almost wish Bud were up here at this point. I mean, I think that we're hopefully getting to a place where more people are recognizing the phenomenon, more willing to work with people. Hopefully some grant money will begin to come in so people who don't have the means can be worked with, can be supported. Started a small program at Cambridge where called PEER, a program for extraordinary experience research, which is support public education and research for abductees, and which does not, involve having to pay. But I think that it's a very big problem. I mean, I think there are very few people. I mean, it's interesting that most of the people that pioneered in this were not mental health professionals. Bud is an artist, Dave Jacobs is a historian, James Harder, I think, is a experimental physiologist, or they're not engineer. They're not basically clinicians, and little by little, clinicians are beginning to recognize this and not pigeonhole people. And I think if you inquire around in your community and call our program, we may be able to identify someone. Where do you live? You live around here? Catskills.